everybody. Can everyone hear me okay? Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming. This is a pretty exciting night for us at Dunedin Public Library, so it's great to have a full house and people asking me, can we have more seats? Can we get more people in? Now, something that we're going to request for this evening is that there is no photography during the talk. I know that many of you will have come prepared with cameras. There is an opportunity to take photographs during the book signing, so feel free to do so during that period. And I'm on hand to be able to take some photos if anyone does need a spare pair of hands. But no photography during the actual talk, please. Now, Annie Proulx is the author of 9 books and the winner of many awards. Her first novel, Postcards, won the Pen Faulkner Award. The Shipping News, which I think many of you will know and love quite dearly, has won a Pulitzer Prize and National Book Award and was made into a film in 2001. Her short story, Brokeback Mountain, became a BAFTA Academy Award and Golden Globe Award-winning film. Bird Cloud, a memoir, is the first work of non-fiction for 20 years. I'm not sure how many of you know the story behind it, but I'm going to leave that to Annie to explain. But for anyone who lives in New Zealand and lives here because they love the beauty and the natural landscape that we're all lucky to be part of, I think you'll understand what this book is about. Now, Annie's going to talk for around half an hour, and then we're going to field questions. After that, there are book signings. And the books are $35 for Birdsong and $27.99 for any of her back catalogue. Now, I'd like to thank HarperCollins Publishers for giving us this opportunity. As many of you will be aware, we're extremely fortunate to have Annie with us, but unfortunately, Christchurch has missed out. Because of that, we'd like everyone to just spare a thought for all those Annie Proulx fans who are in Christchurch tonight, and we do have donation boxes on the way out, so if anyone would like to donate to the Red Cross Earthquake Appeal, you'd be most welcome to do so. I'd like to thank the University Bookshop for being here and for giving us all an opportunity to get a book signed, and most of all I'd like to thank Annie Proulx for coming to Dunedin. So without further ado, please give a warm hand to Annie Proulx.
Thank you all for coming. I've never been to Dunedin before. This is the first time. I'm going to talk about a place. This is a memoir of place, not a person. The place is called Bird Cloud, and that's the name of the house and the property. Is this actually on? Let's wait a minute and see if they can throw the switch. Yeah, okay, I think that's a little better, is it not? Bird Cloud is in the state of Wyoming, and Wyoming is in the west. It is the state where Yellowstone Park is located. It is a state of great beauty, basin and range in topography. The Rocky Mountains run sideways or at a slant through it. And they are broken up into 19 ranges within the state: the Wind Rivers, the Snowies, the Medicine Bows, the Sierra Madres, and many, many more. But it's the emptiest state. I'm going to torture you with American figures. The size of the state is 97,000 square miles, which translates roughly into 250 plus square kilometers, and the population is less than 500,000, which works out to about 5 people per square mile. There is no city in Wyoming larger than 50,000 people, and there's only one of those. So it's an empty place. And It's the emptiest place in the United States. It's also the leader in suicides in the United States, which is saying a lot. There are a lot of suicides. In Wyoming, though, I think that's a per capita figure, and I used to live on the east slope of the Medicine Bows, and there was a great, huge area called the Big Hollow, where the wind had scooped out a long, long hole that ran for 9 miles from west to east and was, I've forgotten how many feet deep, but for some reason old ranchers who got ready to pick up their checks went down there to commit suicide, and it's very strange. Well, I don't want to get into the suicide thing. That's a place where it happens. This is a book about a house called Bird Cloud, a place called Bird Cloud. You can't see the house in this photograph unless you know where it is, and it's just at the base of the cliff, a tiny little brown thing that's the roof. I noticed coming in on the plane that there were a lot of cows down below and a lot of sheep, and it occurred to me that this might be the right crowd to speak to about Wyoming's stock people. The earliest cattle ranches in Wyoming were all run by Scots, and many vivid stories were attached thereunto. In fact, part of this book is about the neighbors, the early neighbors, rather than the present neighbors. And one of the early neighbors is what I'm going to do a bit of reading about tonight and break into explanations of things as I go. Henry Seton-Karr. Henry Seton-Karr held much of the property adjacent to Bird Cloud in the 19th century. He discovered world-class hunting and a dubious business opportunity in Wyoming. Although it's not fair to judge him by today's values, historians call this presentism, he seems a caricature of the landed gentry in his 1904 My Sporting Holidays. Seton-Karr was a Scot and a privileged member of the elite class of wealthy landowners in the British Isles. He wrote his book for My Brother Sportsmen of the Anglo-Saxon Race. He was a creature of his times, as we all are. Born in 1853, India, where his colonial service father represented the British Raj, he believed in the inborn rights of patriotic, educated white Britons to rule presumed lesser parts of the world. He saw his class, those representatives of the British Empire, as possessing the inherent freedom to use the entire globe for purposes of monetary gain or pleasure. He was a sportsman in the way that only the wealthiest and most fanatic upper-class shooters in the period from 1870 to the First World War could be. He lived by a sportsman's code and defended the British hunters' quote, lust to kill the hunted. He was rock certain that no race of men possesses this desire more strongly than the Anglo-Saxons of the British Isles, an inherited instinct which civilization cannot eradicate of a virile and dominant race. His photographs show him in his 20s and 30s as slender, very dapper, with a large dark mustache. He was handsome and intense. As the years passed and he spent more time in Parliament than in the forests and fields, he put on weight, and at the time of his dramatic death he was fairly hefty. He always sought out the largest and handsomest animals, and when he was shooting wapiti, which is the old name for elk, or red deer, or mountain sheep, it was the quality of the animal's head that guided his choice of target. And of the head, it was the horns he most esteemed, following a complicated horn and antler value scale of points. By today's standards, he was a game hog. He blithely noted that he and his party once easily obtained our limit of 800 brace of grouse and black game, killed 18 stags in 10 days stalking, and on a good day in the morning caught a salmon of 12 pounds, while after lunch 3 good stags were killed. He seemed unaware that size-focused trophy hunting removed the largest animals from the gene pool, a kind of secondary genetic engineering that favors smaller racks and animals. Wyoming's first territorial legislature met and passed a feeble law in 1869 to limit the taking of big game, but without provision for enforcement, it was writ in water and everywhere flouted. Perhaps one of the most notably ineffective laws of its kind ever passed. Everyone, military men, immigrants, settlers, train passengers, foreign sportsmen, shot animals in truly astounding quantities in the Western Territories. Seton-Karr was only part of the anything goes ways of unchecked hunting and fishing. Skipping over a bit. Gradually, a distaste for the rampant taking of horns and heads by foreign sportsmen grew, and in 1875, the Wyoming legislature, trying again, and perhaps fearing that there would be nothing left for them to shoot, passed a wildlife law setting a big game season of August 15th to January 15th. The vote was prefaced by the governor's reproving report that one party alone had killed more than 100 elk in the East Mountains east of the Seminole district that year, taking only the teeth and hides and leaving the meat to rot. The legislation also prohibited waste, but only on paper, and hunters did as they pleased. Seton-Karr and his guns traveled back and forth between the British Isles and North America countless times, always first class on the great steamers of the day. He was a platinum card member of the 19th century equivalent of the jet set. In a sense, big game hunting was more his life's work than were his political career or the duties of running the family estate or the ranch that he eventually bought in Wyoming. As an Oxford undergraduate, he spent the vacation month shooting in Norway, and on his first day on Hittern Island, surprised the golden eagle within 40 yards as he rose from landing on a dead sheep, and a charge of number 6 shot up the feathers and brought him wounded to the ground, and we slew him with a stone. On another of those joyful days, he wrote, I once shot a cock capercaillie, a stag, and a white-tailed eagle with 3 consecutive shots of a single Henry Express rifle, all within the space of 10 minutes or less. He might have been content to hunt red deer in Norway and Scotland for the rest of his life, but for an accidental glimpse of a tremendous set of antlers. In 1876, freshly graduated from Oxford and walking down London Strand, he saw a formidable set of elk, which they called wapiti in those days, antlers in a gunmaker's shop window. On fire with curiosity, he inquired and found the animal had been shot by a Mr. Otho Shaw, who had recently returned from a hunting expedition in Wyoming, whence he had brought some good wapiti heads. And from him, I obtained an introduction to the Western ranchman, Frank Ernest by name, who had accompanied him as hunter and guide. A few months later, 23-year-old Seton-Karr arrived at Rawlins, Wyoming, which is about 20 miles from Bird Cloud. That's going the back way with a pair of wire cutters because someone has put a fence across the public road, and if you want to get through, you have to cut your way through. It's that kind of place. With his friend Thomas Bate, and the pair made their way to Frank Ernest Ranch in the valley of the North Platte, about 20 miles south of Fort Steele. And this is the property next door to the Bird Cloud property. Over the next 4 months, scores of elk, grizzly bears, bison, antelope, mule deer, and mountain sheep of the Medicine Bow and Sierra Madre ranges, the rattlesnakes, and the Bates hole fell before Seton-Karr's rifle. He took few chances with Wyoming grizzly bears, but trapped them first and then shot them. A photograph shows the 12-point elk with 58-inch antlers he shot in the medicine bow. Even so young, he knew he was in a place incredibly rich in wildlife, and looking back over 30 years later, when the game had all been shot out and the elk and bighorn herds driven down by domestic sheep and beef cows, he wrote nostalgically, "At the present time, 1904, this country is a huge sheep and cattle ranch. The river meadows and streams are for the most part wire-fenced. Flock masters with their herds and traveling wagons pass over it to and fro from summer to winter range, and the wild green pastures of the 70s are now a thing of the past, eaten up, trodden down, periodically desolated by the thousands of domestic sheep that have largely added to the wealth of Wyoming, but have, on the other hand, ruined a large part of the state as a game preserve and hunting ground. But in the days of which I write, Wyoming was a hunter's paradise." He came back to Carbon County in the North Platte again and again, first to hunt and fish, and finally, when the bison were gone and most of the biggest heads hung on the walls of estates in the British Isles, to vaguely oversee the cattle ranch that became his in 1883. Frank and Bonaparte Ernest, the latter better known as Boney Ernest, were two Canadian brothers who'd come from Toronto to Wyoming Territory to trap and guide and fight in the Indian Wars. They eventually took up cattle ranching. Seton-Karr liked and trusted Frank Ernest, but apparently had suspicions about Boney Ernest's probity. After 7 years of hunting acquaintance, Seton-Karr bought the Ernest Ranch, renamed it Sand Creek Land and Cattle Company, and hired Frank as manager. Together they purchased 2,000 Utah cows to run on the open range, and it was all open range in those days. It's still open range. That means if you don't want cows in your garden or property, you put the fence up. The cattle can go where they wish. And if you run over one, you pay. Together, Frank Ernest and Seton-Karr purchased 2,000 Utah cows to run on the open range. The ranch pastures extended 70 miles north from the North Platte River, the first of the big ranches in this part of Wyoming. The brand was in the form of a pick, and no one called the ranch the Sand Creek outfit. It was known by the brand, the Pick Ranch. It's still called the Pick Ranch. The Pick Bridge is still the Pick Bridge, and the road is still the Pick Bridge Road. So it persists. And today the old log ranch house still stands where my neighbor, Ken Olson, and his family lived for years before selling out in 2006. Ken had 2 children, a daughter and a son, and during the spring roundup in 2006, the son, who was helping with the branding roundup, was kicked in the chest by a calf and died with a blow to the heart that did him in. And it might just as well have been a kick to Ken's heart as well, because he was old and couldn't run the ranch alone, and his only son was gone, so he put it up for sale and sold it within hours, I think, to a big outfit that owned something called Pace Hot Sauce, bought up by Campbell's Soup and Foods a few years back. And so those are the neighbors now. It's Campbell Soup. And this is the trend now. All of the great big ranches are mostly owned by corporate entities who are in it for the money. Not that Seton-Karr wasn't. The Pick Ranch, like other big Wyoming spreads with absentee owners, suffered loss and depredations, wrote Seton-Karr. It was extraordinary how herds of range cattle, bought often on book count, melted away in the course of a few years from off the wild, unfenced prairies and foothills of Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado. count was one of the most stupid practices in cattle ranching during the last quarter of the 19th century. The owner made an estimate, often just a wild guess, of the number of cows in his herds and wrote it down in a notebook. Later, if he sold a herd, the gentleman's agreement figures in the book were taken as reality. Tales abound of cheating, lying, imaginative cattlemen selling paper cows that did not exist. Eventually, the light switched on and buyers and bankers realized that an actual count was necessary. Seton-Karr admitted that bad winters and book counts were partially responsible for the disappearance of good English dollars that have jumped into Western pockets and have since given little or no return. There was another reason for the lack of income: cattle rustling. The titled Scotsman tried to make light of the unpleasant fact that picked cows seemed to decrease in number instead of multiplying. He wrote in an amused tone that many Western owners possessed ragged old Texas cows of an extraordinary fecundity, even in seasons when the big outfits of the neighborhood had maybe a very poor branding season. 2 celebrated cows on Sand Creek, belonging to an old native rancher of my acquaintance and his wife, were known in 2 years to have ostensibly produced no less than 52 calves. In the best Wyoming style of local justice, he said, the old rancher and his wife were found hanging in a convenient cottonwood tree one fine morning. Seton-Karr declares sanctimoniously that the perpetrators were unknown, but slyly adds that among those rumored to be responsible was a candidate for the state legislature. In a later chapter, Seton-Karr mentions that Boney Ernest was running for election in the legislature. This story sounds suspiciously like a tale based on the 1889 vigilante hanging of the homesteader Jim Averill and nearby Ella Watson, the latter believed to have traded sexual favors to cowboys in return for mavericks. Mavericks were orphan calves, and sometimes they were helped to be orphan calves by cowboys who wanted to start their own herd. Ella Watson was called Cattle Kate by a Chicago newspaperman, and she has, under the name of Cattle Kate, entered history. Some historians see the double hanging as an early chapter in the Johnson County War, which was the source of more bad cowboy movies than any other event. This big rancher versus little homesteader war became the plot basis for hundreds, literally hundreds of Western movies. As Miss Watson was, according to the historian T.A. Larson, the only woman ever hanged in Wyoming, legally or illegally, Seton-Karr's loose account was probably patched together through hearsay and imagination. He undoubtedly dined out on it for years. Seton-Karr's account of the Johnson County War is also suspect, as he confuses the town of Buffalo with Casper, and unlike most historians, says the hired Texas gunmen involved in this war were Texas Rangers. But it's possible he knew something that we don't from his part ownership of the huge XIT ranch in Texas. There was a rustler closer to home. One of the Pick Ranch cowboys was Charlie Smith, described by Seton-Karr as a long-legged, powerful rider of the ideal cowboy type. And the Pick foreman was Chico, a fine roper. One day Chico asked Frank Ernest and Seton-Karr if he could fire any cowboy he wanted. They, somewhat puzzled, said yes. Chico explained that he thought Charlie Smith was too handy with a rope. Local talk indicated that Smith was in league with a Rawlins butcher, Al Hurt, whose new flat iron brand appeared tailor-made to absorb the Pick brand with only a few alterations. It was September, and the fall roundup was at hand. while Chico and the cowhands gathered the 3- and 4-year-olds destined to provide dividends for shareholders in the old country 5,000 miles away, Seton-Karr and a party of friends would be on a month-long hunt in the Medicine Bow Range. They arranged that the cowboys and hunters would meet up at the far side of the range, but it did not work out that way. The second night in the hunting camp, one of the picked crew, Jack Savage, galloped in with the news that Charlie Smith had killed Chico after Chico fired him. When Smith started to retaliate, apparently, for the firing, Chico shot at him. Smith's thick-rolled neckerchief saved his life. Chico wasn't so lucky, and he died that night with, according to Seton-Karr, the pathetic last words, "Boys, I die for the pick." He is supposedly buried in a Rawlins cemetery, but I haven't found his stone, and I'm sure those words are immortalized on it. Seton-Karr was annoyed, for he and his hunting companions had to give up their hunt and gather cows for the next 3 weeks. The shareholders in Scotland and England were waiting for the dividends. Charlie Smith himself came to a rather bad end a few years later, plugged by a rancher who knew the man had been rustling his stock. In late May of 1914, the 61-year-old Seton-Karr, still fit from a lifetime of athletic adventures, though a little stout, enjoyed a successful climbing holiday in British Columbia and was on his way back to London. In Quebec City, he boarded the SS Empress of Ireland, a Canadian Pacific Railway luxury ocean liner on which he had his usual first-class accommodations. The ship, with 1,500 passengers and fitted with sufficient lifeboats after the tragedy of the Titanic 2 years before, sailed in late afternoon, heading east down the St. Lawrence Seaway. An hour and a half after midnight, the pilot left the ship at Rimouski, and the Empress steamed toward the open Atlantic. Very soon after the pilot left, Captain Henry George Kendall, on his first trip with the Empress, saw a low-lying collier coming up the river. This coal carrier, the SS Storstad from Sydney, Nova Scotia, was heavily laden. Exactly what happened next is still not clear. For that night, a heavy spring fog blanked out everything, and the accounts given at the later investigations varied. The Storstad somehow rammed the Empress amidships. The beautiful liner sank in 14 minutes. So swiftly did she go down that there was not enough time to launch more than a few lifeboats. And among the 1,012 people who lost their lives was Henry Seton-Karr. But a New York Times report on the tragedy depicted him as a hero who gave his life jacket to a man who had none, saying confidently that he would get another. He didn't. I think we could stop there and do questions if Lynette will help out.
Thank you very much. That was beautifully read.